Hi, my name is Kocurek, and I'm an associate professor in Digital Humanities and Media Studies at the Illinois Institute of Technology. This is a special video I made for prospective students because my classes, like everyone's classes, have moved online this semester, and it's not as conducive to bringing in prospective students, which is a shame. I love having you in class, but hopefully this is at least a little fun for everyone. So I'm going to talk about video game advertising, but I want to start and just let you know a little bit about me and the work I do. So I'm a historian by training, and I've written two books, Coin-Operated Americans, Rebooting Boyhood at the Video Game Arcade, which is about video game arcades, and Brenda Laurel, which is a book about the game designer Brenda Laurel, and that's part of a series I co-founded and co-edit on influential game designers for Bloomsbury. I'm also a game designer myself. On the left here, you can see the homepage for Choice Texas. That's an interactive fiction game, and Paste Magazine called it one of the best games of 2014, which I'm still extremely proud of. On the top right, you see what looks like an academic journal article, and it kind of is. This is an alternate reality game, and the journal article is actually the rabbit hole. So if you read the article, there's like citations from the future and like a few other things that should tip you off that all's not what it seems. And you can actually play through that, and there's a game, and there's puzzles to solve and things like that. That's part of a special issue on feminist hacking at Ada New Media, and it's published under the name Susan Kocurek, who is not a real person, and who's at the Antarctic Institute of Technology, which is also not a real school. At the bottom right, you see Save Point. Save Point's not a game. It's a zine I do that's crowdfunded. That's a game history zine for a general audience, and I do all the illustrations and all the writing, and it's super fun. So what do I teach? I teach history of video games, which is the class this lecture most closely aligns to. I also teach interactive storytelling, which is a production class, and fundamentals of game design, which is also a production class. Sometimes I teach other things, but those are more hit or miss. I especially love teaching study abroads focused on pop culture. So I've done Japan a couple times, Scotland once, and I'm actually looking at developing a program that would be in Florida. To look at space and place and pop culture and things like that, because Florida is a really fantastic place to do that. So I also advise graduate students. So if you're a prospective student that thinks maybe someday or maybe soon you will be a graduate student, I work with graduate students primarily on kind of games and games adjacent things, or on gender and technology topics. So if you want to make or use games in a serious way, that's something I can advise you on. Or if you're someone that's interested in the intersections of games and technology, especially, or sorry, gender and technology, especially games and gender, that would also be me. So I want to say a little bit about why I love Illinois Tech students, because I have this opportunity to talk to you. I think our students are extraordinarily creative, collaborative, and innovative thinkers. I hear people complain all the time about how their students mess up group projects, and while that, never say never, that certainly can happen. I find by and large my students are amazing at working together, and they take really good care of each other, and they look out for each other, and they find ways to let everyone be their best, and I really admire that. They're also really creative, and I think sometimes people think of creativity as like something that really is reserved for the arts, but I see it in our students across the board, and I think that they do a phenomenal job of thinking in new ways, and it's really inspiring to be around. I also think our students are generous and inclusive community builders. I watch them go out of their way to take care of each other and include each other, and I find that really moving, actually. So I think a lot of different kinds of people can feel very welcome on our campus and very valued on our campus, and it's because they are welcome and valued, and that's really a huge credit to our students, and I love working with them because of that. I also see them as engaged and critical community members, and I was trying to think of a nice way to say that. I think I finally found one, but students at our university, like, they don't just follow rules because they're rules. They follow rules because they understand them and they think they're important, and they'll ask you if they don't understand. And I actually think that's great. I like that students are not complacent. They're engaged. They want to know why things are the way they are. And, a lot of times they're drivers of change on campus and making things better. And I really respect that, and I appreciate that. And I think it's great to get to work alongside them for that. So what's the history of video games? It's pretty straightforward. It's the historical study of video games. But I do like to distinguish because sometimes when people think history of video games, because it is a fairly recent topic, they think it's just kind of like a catalog of everything that's happened in video games in the past. And that's not quite right, right? Like history is really an analytical field and a field based on research. So you're actually doing a lot of archival work, doing a lot of, right now I'm doing a lot of interviewing and really trying to figure out what we can know about the past, why things are the way they are, why we think they're like that, how maybe they could have been different. Like it's just, yeah, there's a lot. So if you think history is boring, I'm sorry, but it's not. You're wrong. But also, you can study the history of anything, and it's really exciting. So for what I'm going to talk about today, the big picture is that video game advertising is a lens through which to view gaming's cultural politics. So culture is always fraught. There's always conflict. There's always argument about who owns culture, who culture is supposed to serve, what counts. And these are all really interesting questions. They often have really profound implications. So I want to start with this ad. This is an Atari advertisement from about 1978. I don't know the exact year on this one. And it's for Atari Space Invaders for their 2600. And it's a port. It was an arcade game that was hugely successful. So this might actually be 1980. Sorry. Anyway, it's an arcade game that's hugely successful, and it's ported for the home system. The Atari 2600 is that home system, and this sells very, very, very well. Space Invaders, the arcade version, is actually, it helps stave off an economic crash in the video game industry. And then the port helped revitalize the console market. So this is for the 2600. Atari is the largest game company in the US by far at this time. But the thing I want to highlight is if you look at who's in the ad, right? So we've got an adult man playing, and then we have a girl, an older woman, another child, maybe a boy, and it looks like another an adult woman, and then an elderly man, right? Like, so you're really looking at a lot of age diversity, right? And the idea here is that the whole family can play, and this is a major tenet of how Atari advertises and many other console makers, because consoles are expensive, and they want folks buying them to know that, like, you're not just buying this for one person in the family, it's for everyone. And so here's a console in a very middle-class living room, and it says, people have been standing in line at arcades to play Space Invaders. Now, thanks to Atari, they can stand in line at home. So it's keeping them in the home, it's domesticating the game, but it's also really, really highlighting that games are for everyone in the family. And I think that's an important point. So this is common in how games are advertised early on. Arcade games are also advertised in a way that assumes they're being played by couples on dates or youth after school and things like that. But there's a crash in the 80s, and as the industry starts kind of reconvening, it changes a lot. And one of the things that really changes is how games are advertised. So this is a 1990 ad for the Sega Genesis, and their slogan that they use quite broadly is Genesis does what Nintendo don't, right? Like, they're like, our games are more violent, they're flashier, they're cooler. And this is like a major, major advertising campaign that lasts several years. And I just want to note, because I think it's funny, if you go bottom center on these little like sample screens on the ad, you have a game called Columns that's like 100% a knockoff of Tetris. So like, which was like one of Nintendo's big hits. But anyway, so Sega uses this advertising campaign as this idea of like extreme, right? Like, and they kind of back off a little later, but like not that much. And then you have these ads, which always make me very uncomfortable to talk about. But these are from 1992, and they're Sega Official Ads, like they're branded, licensed, real ads from Sega, and they appeared in Viz magazine, which is a UK magazine, often considered like a lad magazine. So really targeting young men, kind of similar to something like Mad Magazine here in the US. But they're basically ads for the Sega, for their consoles, the Game Gear, and then also like their other system that was out at the time, the home system. And they're basically just like making masturbation jokes, right? And like, interesting choice, right, for your corporate brand. So yeah, they're gross. and this is the way they're advertising, but this is like a huge difference from advertising like games for the whole family, right? And I know these are different companies, but you see this across the board. So this just gets more and more entrenched over time. And this next series of images, these are all actual photos I took in the archive. I spent a lot of time at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. They have one of the largest collections in the world of gaming related materials. This is an ad for the Game Shark. The Game Shark was a peripheral that you could use to enter cheat codes into games. And this is like this ad where that's very like boys will be boys, right? It's this little like summer letter from the family. But Andy has shark teeth and he's taken a bite out of his sister's arm. And it's very like kind of like tongue in cheek and funny and cute. And that this is like normal and fine, right? But it's like really like weird, right? And it says a clear thing about like who the Game Shark is for. It's not for Caitlin, or is her name Caitlin? Sorry, maybe her name's Colleen. It's not for her, it's for Andy, right? Who's like signed in blood, and it says abuse the power. So that's from 1996 about, I'm not sure which edition of the Game Shark this is. And then this is an ad that's definitely from 1996. This is the Battle Cruiser 3000 AD. And they ran a whole series of ads like this, and it's this really lovely woman in lingerie. And then like off screen somewhere, there's a man who's saying, not now, right? Like, because he's playing a game. And so the joke here is that like women are only really worth anything for sex, but then like that's not as good as a video game. And so of course the games would like never be for women. This one, I'm not sure on the year on, but it could be around then. It could be a few years earlier because the series it alludes to starts in the late 80s, but I know this ad's from the 90s. And this one's 3 summers ago, it was Zits. 2 summers ago, it was working at Bun and Run, which I assume is some kind of hot dog restaurant. Last summer, it was dating the Kleinfelter twins. This summer experienced a whole new set of challenges, right? And this is for Summer Challenge, which is kind of an Olympic style game. So first of all, like the game it's actually advertising is not necessarily gendered in the way that this ad is, which I think is something to keep in mind, right? Like these games sometimes aren't even quite the way they look here. But I do want to draw attention to like the Kleinfelter twins. It never is clear whether it's 2 sisters or like 1 pair of breasts, right? Like it's not clear here. But it's this idea that like you're getting older and like now like you're over that. Now you need a real challenge, like Summer Challenge, again, a game where you like do golf and horse racing and such. And then this isn't super clear, and I blew it up, but you're still not gonna be able to fully read it. One thing that I think is important about this is actually the stationery, because I think it's beautiful. This is a letter to the editor that's printed in 1995 in Computer Gaming World, and it's from a woman who's 76 years old. Her name's Octavia Reed, and she self-identifies as a hardcore gamer. She's from Vero Beach, Florida, and she wrote in because in the last issue they made like some dismissive comment about older players and that they couldn't be hardcore gamers. And she's saying, I play all the time. I spend a lot of money on games. Like, this is one of my favorite things. Do you really think that we shouldn't renew our subscriptions? Do you think, are you going to fire your one female writer when she gets to my age? Like, you know, why is everything in here a poop joke? And they're really dismissive, actually. And they write back and they're like, look, whatever, lady, it's cool you wrote us, but you're not our target audience. And so they're very dismissive, but I think it's worth noting, like, again, this is, you know, quite a while ago, and you already have this sense that like many people actually are playing games. And I wish I actually had her letter. I think it's beautiful, and I'm sure it's like in the trash somewhere. But at the same time that that's all going on, you also have the Games for Girls movement. And the Games for Girls movement is in some ways a reaction to what's been going on. But in other ways, like I think it's really indicative of the broad appeal of games, right? So you have like Rocket's New School, it comes out in 97. Nancy Drew's Secrets Can Kill comes out in 98. Hugely successful, one of the longest running series now. Mackenzie and Company was from 1995, and then the American Girls premiere, this is the 2nd edition. The 1st edition comes out in 97, and then this edition comes out in 98. So there's like lots going on, right? And some of this is a backlash to an industry that clearly doesn't think girls are important, right? And so companies start saying, you know, we're going to make things just for girls. We're going to take girls very seriously. And that's part of why I wrote the book about Brenda Laurel, and I'm working on a National Science Foundation funded project right now that's looking at the history of the Games for Girls movement. But I really wanted to put these in tension because these are not removed from each other. These are things happening at the same time. So when we think about games and we think like that they're for teen boys, right, which is often a stereotype, like why do we think that? Because in fact, most people play games. And teen boys spend less money on games than adult women. They spend less time playing games than adult women. So it's weird that they remain in this privileged position. And there's lots of like factors that contribute to that, but a lot of it's cultural, right? Like the editors of the magazines, the designers of the games imagine players like themselves, and by and large they're men, and they think that they played games when they were younger, I guess. I don't know. But I also want to highlight the two through 2000, these were the two highest selling games of all time. 1993 is Myst. So again, at the same time that you're seeing this like aggressive move towards everything being like very, very, very bro-y, you also have Myst, right? And Myst is a really lovely puzzle game that's released in 1993. It's actually aged quite well. I recommend playing it. You can get it on your phone for like a few bucks. And it was so popular, it actually drove sales of the CD-ROM. Like people would buy CD-ROM drives to play Myst. So it's like the killer app for the CD-ROM drive. The Sims comes out in 2000, and it unseats Myst as the top selling title of all time. But again, these are titles that are not played by the same demographic that all those ads are really privileging, right? These are games that are played by a different set of players, and you know, Myst remains like very well regarded. There's a great book about it by Mark J.P. Wolf. The Sims has launched this like hugely successful series, right? Like it's still going. And so all these things are happening at the same time, and they're happening in ways that I think are interesting, right? So like here's where the money is. Like the actual money seems to be in games that have like a pretty different kind of interface and a pretty different kind of appeal than what we think of video games as being. But what's being advertised is often not that, right? Like, it's being advertised as if the players that want Myst and The Sims don't exist. It's been being advertised as if players like Octavia Reed don't exist, even though Octavia Reed, I bet, spends more money on games in the, like, I bet at the time Octavia Reed is playing games in 1995, she's spending more money on them than most of the teen boys reading the magazine, right? And so there's something weird going on there. And so the conclusion, you can think about this more, is like a lot of these are very like highly sexualized, and or at least heavily gendered, right? And so like sex sells, but so does a bunch of other stuff, right? Like Myst sells, The Sims sells. So why is a narrow idea about sex so aggressively the focus? Because it's not even just sex, right? It's like sex for an imagined audience of heterosexual young men who maybe don't like women very much. I don't know. There's a lot going on there. So I would say this isn't really about who's playing or buying games, because if we look at who's playing and buying games, even at this time, it's a little more diverse than the advertisements would make us think. But it's really more about which players and buyers the industry cares about. And some of that has to do with the ecosystem of the industry. So you have people making games who became game makers because they were players and they felt welcome in the industry, which is really not very diverse, right? So Donna Bailey, for example, who worked on Centipede, which is one of the first games to integrate an AI, and it's hugely successful arcade game, and she's responsible for it using a trackball controller, which is part of why it's so successful. She was like the only woman in Atari R&D at the time, and she didn't stay very long because she didn't feel super at home in the industry, I think, and various other things. And then so there's always women. They often make really successful things, but there's very few women. So there's kind of like a homogenous idea about what games could be and who they're for. We also all imagine an audience, like if we're like an average person would like this, we really mean like ourselves would like it. So because the industry is homogenous, their imagined player base is quite homogenous. Additionally, like you need a whole ecosystem to get games out into the world. So if you make a game for girls, for example, in 1996, you're probably gonna have a really hard time getting reviews of it because there's not a lot of magazines that are gonna review games that actually care about girls as an audience. And so they're going to see the game as irrelevant or not good or something like that, whether or not that's fair, right? And so it's hard to get them reviewed. It's hard to get them shelved even, like they're not quite software. A lot of toy companies like start splitting things by gender. And so they don't know where to shelve these, which is like a huge problem. The software industry in whole is like really volatile. The games industry is really volatile. And so like you'll have a game that's like the game of the year in 95, and then like 6 or 8 months later, you can't buy it anywhere. It's just gone. But there's a lot at play here about values, right? And it's not just about like what makes money, because in fact, different kinds of things make money than what really gets highlighted, right? As we see with like Myst and The Sims. So there's a lot going on here in terms of values and who's making decisions and like how those decisions are made. So this is just a quick like analysis of some images I find really provocative and interesting. If you love these things, you should come take my class. Or actually you can go to MagFest, does like a whole history track, which is I love it. I love it so much. And so I go and present there. You can read my work. If you want to find some, I can always send you links. So thanks. I hope you'll consider coming to join us at Illinois Tech. I think it's a great school. I'm really proud to be a part of it. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm easiest to get a hold of on Twitter, actually, where I'm Sparkle Bliss. But you can also email me at my IIT email, which is ckocurek@iit.edu. And yeah, I hope I'll see you in the fall, summer, sometime. Have a great day. Bye.